All right, it is Friday, the 3rd of January, 2025. I am using a bit of, I guess it's a lunch break. I don't know, it's a little bit after lunch and I haven't eaten, so it's probably a good reminder that I should get something. But I had a question that was submitted to me. This is on LinkedIn, which is great. Super thankful that someone, felt like that I would be able to help with this kind of thing. So I'll answer that. I didn't get to go to CrossFit this morning because I am getting sick again. I think it's like the same thing that's like coming back. So I apologize if I have to cough and stuff, but I think this is a really cool. It's a When I say a cool question, I don't mean because someone's facing a challenge. I think it's interesting, and I think this will resonate with some folks actually. So let me dive into the question and then I'll talk about a few different angles that I want to approach here. So, someone submitted this. They have, between 4 and 5 years of professional experience. So they're at the point where they were brought in as a senior, as an individual contributor. So they're working at a tech company, and they're saying that the work itself is challenging, but also like manageable, right? So it's a good amount of challenging. It's not like, oh crap, I have no idea what's going on, or so easy where they're like, whatever, this is trivial. So I feel like that's a good spot to be in. And then they said that they're kind of getting the impression that they're not really meeting the expectation of a senior, and their manager was actually transparent with them when they asked about it, and the manager said like no, but the manager did say, you are still ramping up. And I think I have to scroll through this to find. I think it's been a couple of months. It probably says in here. Sorry, I might be missing that, but it's been even the manager is saying they're still ramping up, and the manager said, "But I can see that you are on the right track." And this is like, I'll jump in right now and say like I've absolutely had situations like this with individuals on teams where it's like their initial ramp up period is going to feel like, yeah, they might be operating sort of at like a junior level in terms of output, productivity, or whatever else, because they are ramping up. And I've had those conversations and set those expectations for people to say, hey, look, like, yeah, the expectation is much higher, but that's not a problem at this point because I can see the progress. So I just wanted to kind of jump in right from the beginning and mention that. So okay, and I can see it's not a number of months, but I guess it's been yeah, like 2-3 months or so, let's say. So what else are they adding in here? So this is great when people write in, they provide a lot more context. So I'm guessing less at like what things to touch on here. So they're kind of talking about some of the things they've been working on. And a couple of, like, even from reading this, it's been a couple of months and they're doing some experiments, they're prototyping things, trying things out. Some things aren't working, which, by the way, like when you go to do this type of stuff, that's going to be expected sometimes. It's not like, hey, go deliver this feature by a certain date, have it done. It's like, it's an experiment, a prototype, a spike, sometimes it'll be called. You should expect that sometimes these things will fail, but there's like all this learning that goes along the way, and that's not not a waste of time necessarily if these things are time boxed. So they had a couple things like that they were working on, and then they're kind of saying that they're reaching a point where they're one of these projects that's coming up is potentially bigger. Okay, and that means that they're potentially going to need to recruit some people to go to work with them on this. I don't necessarily understand the scope in terms of cross team or just within the team, but looks like they're going to need some support with going to build out whatever this project's going to be. So this is one part of it, because the question that they have is kind of like, what can they be doing to get more on the senior path? So they're talking about some projects and where they're at. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring into this, because this is really important, and I feel like a lot of the time people forget this kind of stuff, unfortunately. But the other thing that they're mentioning is sort of this work-life balance that's going on. So their family has expanded, so congratulations, that's really awesome to hear. And, I don't have kids, but I know, I know that because I have a niece and nephew, so I get to see it sort of remotely when I'm Skyping my family and doing check-ins over the past, 10 years. I know it's a lot of work. I can't imagine exactly how much work because I don't have the kids, but I know it's a lot of work, and that's going to mean different, stressors, pressure in life, like all these, like your life changes, right? So I understand that. And then they're also mentioning that there is a really significant time difference, and that's important. So it's almost, I think they say 9 hours here. So 9 hour time difference from the rest of their team. Okay, so we have time zone differences, we have work life balance things to consider, and then we have this ramp up period where they're trying to feel more senior. So, three different elements. I think this is super cool. We're going to dive into it, and this is my reminder to you that if you want questions answered, leave them in the comments, or like this person did, find me on social media. Look for Dev Leader, or on LinkedIn, it's just Nick Cosentino. I think this person was able to message me. My profile is premium, so you should be able to reach out. And then leave as much detail as you want. Obviously, this is super anonymous. I'm not giving any other detail about this person. And I want to walk through this because I'm hoping it's going to be valuable. Second reminder here, too, is just that if you like this type of stuff, my main channel, Dev Leader, on Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific, I do have a live stream. So if you want to tune into that, be awesome to see you there. You can, the goal of that is that I'm engaging with the chat so that we can have conversations like this. And because I'm not in the car, I literally sit right here when I'm doing the live stream. So pretty convenient. And it won't be over my lunch break at work. So, okay, where to start with this? I think the first thing that's really good is that this person had a conversation with their manager, and I wouldn't end it there. Okay, so they reached out, they kind of brought it up with their manager. Hey, I feel like I'm not really meeting expectations. This is good to be able to have this conversation, okay? But just don't let it end there. It's not a one-time thing. This is a regular type of thing you should be doing. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be every day, every week, or whatever. But if you're feeling like you have this, well, if you have this feeling that you aren't meeting expectations, try to level set on them. It's great that their manager was transparent and said, no, not meeting senior expectations right now. But right? And this is the really positive part, which is like, I know that you're ramping up, and I actually think that you are on a good pace for this. So this is all very reassuring. The part that's missing, in my opinion, is like, well, what else needs to be done? So the manager acknowledges that there's some ramp up going on. Great. They say that things are on the right track. Great. But what are the, if when we're looking for feedback, we should try to be specific as much as possible. And I will even say as an engineering manager, like, it's difficult for me to do this sometimes, so I'm not trying to, poke at their engineering manager and say, oh, they should have done this better. But, what specifically are they noticing that's going well in the ramp up, right? Is it sort of enough throughput? Is it the right focus areas? Is it, productivity and code reviews? Like, whatever it happens to be by whatever metric, like, what is the manager seeing that looks good, and what are the things that the manager's like, we need a little bit more work there, or even maybe it's across the board that everything is sort of level set, but like we just need to keep ramping it up. But I think more detail and more clarity on that would be very beneficial, and this individual should keep having that conversation, right? So great, okay, cool. Good. In my opinion, that is good feedback. It might not sound like it on the surface, like, oh, you're not meeting expectations, but it could just be the way that this is communicated. Because, like I said, I have had this very same type of conversation where I have told someone, no, like, you aren't meeting the expectations of a fully onboarded senior, right? And that's actually okay. That is my expectation right now. You are ramping up. So another thing that they could touch on perhaps is like, what is the manager's expectation in terms of ramp up period? I've told this story before, but as an engineering manager at Microsoft, I remember when I joined the first team at Microsoft, my manager told me, and was serious about this, and he was right. He said, it's going to take you about a year until you feel comfortable. He was right. It took me a year. When I switched teams earlier this year at Microsoft, it was to a different sort of technology space, but still within Office 365, or what we call Substrate for all the platforms for Office 365. It took me probably between 4 to 5 months before I started feeling more confident about the things I was speaking about. So half the time, which is that's a great improvement, but that's still a significant amount of time. So in the first instance, my manager did give me that expectation. Like, it's going to take you a while. And he was very transparent about it. And, and that was great. And I made sure that along the way I had that feedback loop with him. Like, hey, like, are these areas that you expect me to be working in, paying more attention to? Does that look like it's going well? So that's something that I honestly cannot recommend enough to people, is to try to make sure as much as possible that you're in a situation with your manager where you can have these conversations. If you don't feel that way, like, it's either something you need to work on with your manager. Every manager is going to be different. Who it's unfortunate, but like sometimes managers like aren't great at peopling, and in my opinion, that's their number one job. So if you have a manager that's like this, you try to acknowledge that, right? Understand that that's where they're coming from. So you might have to bring this kind of stuff up with them because they're not being proactive about it. But ultimately, the goal is not to create some weird pressure on your manager. The goal is for transparency, right? You just want to make sure that you can understand their expectations and work towards them. So that's thing number one. I think this person has started doing that, which is awesome. Please continue doing that. Please try to work towards specific things. And again, full acknowledgement that sometimes those specific things are hard for a manager to pinpoint. But again, I will say that if I've had people come say to me, like, hey, can I get feedback on whatever? And my feedback kind of feels general. And now that they've seeded it in my head, the next time we have conversations, what makes it a little bit easier is that now I'm kind of like a little bit more proactively thinking about it. So some things might stand out, and I go, oh yeah, next time I talk to Johnny on the team, I'm going to make sure that I can say, like, hey, like, I noticed that you've been doing this stuff and that's going really well. So it could just be something that needs some iteration, which is another reason. Please keep having the conversation. Something else that this person mentioned in terms of project scope and stuff like that, the stuff that they were talking through, I feel like is a good fit for senior type roles. So I kind of said that when they're doing prototyping and stuff like that, it's not like a I don't know, like a strike against you if you're prototyping something and it's an experiment and it doesn't work out, right? If it was time boxed and like your manager and the product owner and the team agreed that this is the right time box, and you stuck to that, and you weren't like, oh, oops, we said it was going to be a week or 2 weeks of trying it, and hey, it's 2 months later and I'm still just like off in outer space doing this. If that's not you, great. Like, you don't want to be in that kind of position, but it is an experiment. You might go through the process and learn all these things, then ultimately go, this isn't going to be a good fit. No, we shouldn't do this. This maybe isn't a good path for now. Let's document the learnings and move on, right? It's a normal thing. I spent a lot of my career before Microsoft prototyping things, literally including like almost every internship I had some amount of like prototyping things. And then when I worked in a digital forensics company, not only was I prototyping stuff kind of just because we needed to start building things, but I ended up leading a prototyping team. And right before I left, and they still have it to this day, I was about to be managing or like potentially directing this prototyping team. So, like, that's what I did, and you should expect that they're going to fail a lot of the time. Failures will mean learning, though. So I don't hold that against this person. I actually think that if they're in a spot where they can be doing these experiments, that's going to really help with domain knowledge, in my opinion. They're going to have to be talking with people on the team as well, learning about this stuff. So I think that's a great type of activity. But I think the next thing they called out is even better. So, or when I say even better, I don't mean the type of work is better, but I think in terms of like sort of flexing your senior muscle. That's a really weird phrase. That this is a pretty good fit, which is going to be a feature delivery or a project scope that will require extra people to jump in. So they didn't say, and I can't just make assumptions, but this is something that I would definitely recommend, like have a conversation with your manager about it. So I don't know what the process is at their company or their team, I should say. how do they approach this kind of stuff, right? So do they need to put a design doc together, a proposal, and go through it with the team and suggest I'm going to need these resources to help? Do they need to work with a project manager, product manager, their manager, whoever, to make that happen? I don't know the details on that. Do they have to wait for planning cycles? I don't know the details on that. But it's a good conversation to have with the manager, because they should be able to clear that up. And then this type of work, though, because that was some of their question, which is like, what should I be focusing on? This. I think this is a great example, as long as it's aligned with the business needs and they're not just kind of like making it up. So that's going to be one of the tricky things, I would say, for sort of senior expectations when you're new in a space, is that when you don't have the domain knowledge yet, it's really difficult to be able to sort of do this, like thinking outside of the box, kind of future looking. If you're new to the whole space, right? Like, I'll give you an example. Like I at Microsoft, I came in at principal level, and I started managing a deployment team when I started at Microsoft. I've never done that before. So for me to have, from the get-go, have insights about, oh, like we should really think about doing this for deployment, this is going to be transformative, that's not an expectation of me, because I don't know the area. That's part of the ramp up process. That's why my manager said it would take me a year before I have that amount of confidence. And so by the time, I built up that confidence, then yes, I was able to think about things at a more principal level, to say, here's how we do things, but if we zoom out and we start looking like at the bigger picture, what could we be doing here? That's an expectation for seniors as well, at most places, to be able to kind of have that that sort of like strategic thinking, or like thinking outside of the box a little bit more. And it's hard to do from the beginning, but even for me, that wouldn't be an expectation of senior team members. But again, have that conversation with your managers. So it might be something where you're like, hey, I'm aware that I need to be doing this, but you could be saying, I don't feel like I know the domain yet. Or maybe in this person's case, maybe they are starting to pick up on these things and they're like, hey, and I think they're kind of touching on a little bit of that in here, right? So I didn't read the full message to you guys, obviously, but I think they're kind of saying like they can see some of these opportunities and stuff, which is great. So this is, again, one of those reasons why, like, okay, if you're seeing opportunities for change and improvement, have that conversation with your manager and the product owner. Maybe it's the same person, I don't know. And if it's aligned with the business, what could you be doing going forward? Because if this is a good fit for a project, it can get prioritized and scoped for whatever, period of delivery. Being able to say, okay, I'm going to be the one leading this. I'm going to be helping some other juniors on the team, even if they have more, tenure on the team. This is something I'm going to try to have accountability and responsibility for delivering. That's a huge opportunity for a senior. That is what I would be expecting seniors to do. But let's think about it. It's really difficult to do that as someone coming into a completely new space and just having no experience in the team. And the only time I've ever really seen that be successful is if a team is being freshly put together, right? So everyone is kind of new in the space, and it's like, okay, we got to start doing stuff. So whoever has seniority here, please help organize and move things forward. But it's gonna be a little awkward, and that's fine because we're all finding our footing. Totally normal. But if they're coming into an established team and then like right from day one, it's like, okay, you're gonna lead a project, I feel like that's a recipe for disaster. It's really difficult to do that. And like as a manager, when I come into a team, like I feel like that expectation isn't even put on me, or it hasn't been historically. It's like, hey, you're coming into a team, you have like principal engineers, you have senior engineers. They are already leading these projects. Go work with them, try to support them, try to make sure that going forward when we're planning these things, then you're getting involved in the next wave of things. It's what I would recommend to this person as well, right? If you can't start leading this project, it's not like it's going to be the end of the world. Depending on the scope of work and the projects that are ongoing, it might not be a good opportunity to spin up a whole new project to lead. That's fine, right? So, okay, how do you get jumping into a project or something that's existing where you can start building up some more of that experience, and then you're surfacing these ideas, and that way when the time arises, you can say, hey, we talked about this. Is this a priority now? Maybe that's something I can lead. And if there's a different project that comes up, maybe that's something you could lead at that point. But point is, it's not always a good time to go start up a new project, and that doesn't mean that's the end of the opportunities for you. But I personally thought that was a great one to mention in terms of a direction to head in. Okay, time management. So we're about 20 minutes in. Time management wise, this one's tricky, and I wanted to talk about two different aspects here. The remote nature, the fact that this person's 9 hours off and they're already talking about doing this kind of stuff with the team, I think that's great. Honestly, I have seen people onboarding remotely, I guess, like at Microsoft, because we have global teams, and it's challenging. I've seen some people really, really struggle with this, and it takes them a lot longer before they're comfortable. Then they start getting that momentum and they rock it. And I've seen other people get this right away, but it's way more rare. And I've been talking about this a little bit more over the past like 6 months or so, that this is like I don't know, like it is a problem, I think. And unfortunately, like I don't have really good solutions to this kind of stuff right now. But the biggest thing that I notice, that the biggest sort of difference where people are very successful at this, is that they don't let themselves stay blocked. And that's challenging because of personality types. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to bother people. Sometimes people are reaching out for help and then like the person's not responding and they're like, okay, well, I tried. I guess that's it. But it's almost like the people that do well at this, they're kind of pushy. It sounds funny, but they're like, this is the work I'm responsible for. Someone's not responding. Cool. Okay. I'm going to message them again, and then I'm going to find the other person that I can reach out to. Like, I'm not going to give up trying to get unblocked. I tried a couple people. Cool. I'm going to ask my manager. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask in the team chat. Like, I'm not going to give up just waiting. Same thing with their pull requests and stuff. It's like, it's not like, oh, it's done and I'm just going to wait for someone to stumble upon it. Nope, it's done. Here you go, team. Like, these are team dynamics you have to kind of feel out too. But I think the people that I've seen be very successful at this kind of stuff, given time differences, I'm not even talking about the time differences, I guess, yet, but the geography differences, being very proactive and leaning into that to the point where you're like, I might feel a little bit pushy. I think you kind of have to be, because it's going to be your productivity. And honestly, at least when I'm kind of looking up and trying to like picture all these times, I have never seen someone in a remote position like this where they're trying to get themselves unblocked and people are like, oh man, like Sally is so annoying, always asking for help and asking questions and always having code to review. Like, no, like it's almost the opposite, where people are like, holy crap, like Sally's doing so awesome, even though like she's remote, right? I have never seen it go the other way in my experience. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just trying to remind people, like, please lean into this, get yourself unblocked. If you are struggling to get yourself unblocked, please talk with your manager about different strategies for this. Please. Again, I talk about this kind of stuff where I'm saying talk to your manager. That's because that's my leadership style. If you were on my team and having any kind of challenge, if I didn't have full visibility into that, come talk to me. That's literally my job. Come talk to me. Let's get you unblocked. So the time difference though is really difficult, and I think that means you got some options here, right? You probably want to find some core working hours, and I'm going to start mixing in the point about, sort of the family's expanded now and there's a new child. You might find that like you're up at weird hours all of the time for a while now. Unfortunately, I don't know in this person's situation. Maybe their child sleeps perfectly through the night and they kind of have a normal schedule. I doubt it, but it might be possible. But I think one thing is kind of figuring out what your core work hours are and trying to stick to that. When I say stick to that, I mean in terms of communicating that to your team, like, hey, these are the hours I plan to be working. Now, given that you have a new child, odds are there's going to be a little bit of hectic stuff going on and your schedule is not going to remain totally consistent. So this might be an opportunity where you can lean into some flexibility there, where you're like, okay, my day is going to be disrupted. I have to, plan like in terms of time with my wife in this case, like to who's taking care of the kid when they get up to cry at this time or whatever. I don't know all the details for how this stuff works, but my point here is that you might have to do some coordination, and maybe that means that your day is broken up in different ways than you're used to. Maybe you can take advantage of that and say, hey, I know I'm going to have to be up and, wait, like watching the baby monitor or something for this period of time while my wife is sleeping or something. Maybe that's an opportunity where you're like, cool, like I got this hour of dedicated time on these nights or something. Like maybe that's a point where you have some interesting overlap with your team, or you can queue up. And this is kind of where I wanted to go with this thought process. Again, I'm trying to give you some ideas of it, having done this myself, but you can queue up some things like you need to get sort of answers for teammates in other time zones. So maybe that's like, okay, you were working during your day, you had a few things that you needed to reach out to Bob on the team. So you're like, okay, here's my 3 questions for Bob. I'm going to get these ready to get sent over to him. Oh, and Steve on the team has a pull request. Like if I have a 30 minutes now, I can go jump in and maybe go review that. And that way, when Steve comes online, like he's already got my review comments and stuff like that. So you might be able to lean into sort of the chaos here a little bit and try carving out some time that's like, hey, I'm already up. Let me go do this. The work-life balance thing is tricky though, because if you don't balance this properly, you might feel like, okay, so what hours am I working? Like basically around the clock now because Nick's saying just do it when you have some availability. Like if that's not going to work for you, then don't do it. I'm just saying, like with flexibility, you have some options. If you find that you can't manage that properly, restrict them. Right? I've worked with people where like I have seen where they're like, okay, well I'm up and like I'll do this, and I'm like, I know that's not good for your work life balance because I see how much you're online and how much you're working. Like I know, so maybe don't do that. If they're not complaining and they're happy, whatever, maybe that's a good balance for them and they are content with it. But if this person's asking me about work life balance, especially given that they have a new child, this is just something they need to think about for themselves. How much flexibility do they want to have in their schedule? And what does that look like? If they're unable to manage that properly in terms of the flexibility, then I would try to, again, set some boundaries around that, communicate that to the team, and then, given those boundaries, try to think about, okay, I'm reaching the end of my workday. What do I need to make sure that I'm setting up for people coming online so that when I sign in, I can be most effective? And what can I do in terms of getting them set up? Because these are your teammates that you want to be supporting as you're becoming more and more like at your senior level expectations. How can you support them? Right. So when they come online, they get that same benefit of, oh, awesome. Like, I don't know this. I'm not going to say this person's name. I was going to say I don't know it, but I can literally see it. What can this person do so that Sally and Steve and Bob on their team, when they come online, they're like, hell yeah, like I'm good to go. Thanks so much for getting me unblocked. So my recommendation here, like I said, is just think about your sort of the time window that you're able to work within and how effectively you can balance your own time if there's flexibility. So I know for myself, I like being able to give some examples because then it's like, oh, Nick has done something like this. When I worked in Canada on the East Coast, still at Microsoft though, right when I started sort of the beginning of the lockdown, my team was all in Pacific time. So I was like, okay, I'll just adjust my hours. So I started work at noon Eastern time. Okay, it meant that I was working later, but I could start later. It was weird. But I knew it was temporary too because my goal was to move down here to Seattle. Okay, so that's something I adjusted my schedule. It worked for me, totally fine. Now that I'm out here and I live in Pacific time, most of my team is here. But I also have team members that are in China. There are also partner teams that I have to work with that are in India or the UK. And that might mean where I'm having conversations and I'm like, okay, the only way to make this work effectively is I got to wake up early for a meeting. Okay. But if I'm going to do that, I need to make sure, for me, I need to have a few days of notice so I can plan for it. So if I woke up at 5 in the morning to go to CrossFit and I saw a meeting that was for 6 a.m. and I just saw it that morning because someone just sent it to me overnight, I'm not going to that. No, that's crossing my boundaries. So I would decline it and I would say, I need more notice. That's it. That's it. That's all it is. And I have accidentally done the same thing to people in China. Or I'm not really paying attention and I schedule a meeting and then they're like, hey, like that's like 8 a.m. my time and like I just woke up and saw this. And I'm like, okay, sorry, like I will reschedule. That's my bad. So I have to pay attention to that kind of stuff. But I try to set those boundaries. Also, if I'm going to wake up early or stay late to have meetings with people in China, I will make sure that I'm trying to take some time for myself. So if I'm spending an hour early in the morning or spending an hour at night, I will try to make sure that somewhere in the week I'm going to have some flexibility for myself. I might wrap up the day earlier, take a longer lunch, whatever. Like, oh, I have to go run out to do an errand. That's okay. Like I already had like, an extra 2 hours of work between a few meetings that were outside of my work hours. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. And I will say it in the chat, like, hey, I'm stepping out to do errands. And I encourage my team to do that too. So setting these boundaries, I think, is important, communicating them. I don't know. I hope all that's kind of helpful. But I think that this person, from what I'm hearing, from the amount of feedback from their manager and just kind of what they're walking through, I feel like they are on the right track. I'm not concerned about what they're saying. Frequent conversations with the manager for expectations. Try to line up that big project. If it's not going to work out in the short term, don't stress. Try to work on something else as you're getting ramped up and look for those opportunities. And then balance your time, set your boundaries properly. So hope that helps. That's what I got. And I would say, again, if you want your questions answered, leave them in the comments or do as this person did. Find me on social media, Dev Leader, and I'm happy to answer what you got. Take care. See you next time.